Welcome back to the Nuggets of Gold podcast and YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be going over my 53-man roster projections. So me and Aiden were initially going to do 1 day of offense, 1 day of defense. I'm just going to do them all today. Me and Aiden couldn't find a time that works. So I just want to talk to you guys about, the 53-man roster that I think should be in place. The roster cuts are going to be today, so we will know by the end of today whether I am right and I'm sure there'll be a couple spots where I get it wrong. But here's my 53. So I'll go position by position. I'll start at quarterback. I think this one's pretty obvious. You're going to keep two quarterbacks, Jimmy Garoppolo, Trey Lance. I do think that Sudfield has a chance to make the veteran practice squad, but also if they lose him, I don't think it's the biggest deal in the world. I think they could find another guy. I have seen some people voice their concern for the depth around the third string quarterback. There's not really any team in the NFL that's going to have some notable guy as their third string quarterback, so I don't think this is that big of a deal. You're banking on one of or both of those guys staying healthy in Jimmy Garoppolo and Trey Lance. So I think you just need to put those two on the 53-man roster and then potentially have another quarterback, whoever that is, maybe Sudfield, maybe not, on the practice squad. Going into the running back room, I think I have it a little bit different than everyone else does. The three guys that I think are pretty much locks to make it: Raheem Mostert, Trey Sermon, and Elijah Mitchell. However, I know a lot of people are pushing for JaMycal Hastie to make the roster. I really like JaMycal Hastie. I think right now there's a decent chance that he's a little bit farther along than Elijah Mitchell. But the problem is Elijah Mitchell in his last preseason game and throughout practice has flashed that he is a very good player, very good runner of the football. And I do think that the 49ers are going to all right, we have two kind of in between the tackles runners and then two outside runners. Two outside runners I think are going to be Mostert and Mitchell. And then the two inside runners I think are going to be Sermon and Gallman. So I do have Wayne Gallman making the roster over JaMycal Hastie. I know it's a tough one. I do think you could potentially stash Hastie on the practice squad, but he could easily get taken off of it. Maybe you trade him. I'm not really sure what you do, but I do feel bad leaving Hasty off this roster because I do think he's definitely an NFL player, and I do think he's a very good player. I think he could be a solid contributor, but I just think for what the 49ers are going to try to do, they're going to rock with Gallman over Hasty. And I don't think there's any way that they put Mitchell on the practice squad or cut Mitchell. Fullback, Kyle Juszczyk, that one makes sense. I think everyone knows that. Josh Hokett could potentially make it down the road, but I don't think this is his year. Another practice squad guy. At wide receiver, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, Trent Sherfield, Mohamed Sanu. Those guys have kind of come around as like the locks to make the team. I do think Jalen Hurd makes it as well. And I think Jalen Hurd is the last receiver on the roster. But my fifth receiver is Jawan Jennings. We've seen him a little bit in the games. I do think he's a good player. I think he's a guy that kind of gets forgotten about just because he didn't play last year and he was injured. He had a very good career at Tennessee. He had a slow 40, but he's a gamer. He's a dog. And I think the 49ers like him and think he'll make like the back end of that receiver room. And then that could, him and both Hurd are going to be fighting for their jobs next year. But I do think they make it through the cuts these years. And I do think potentially Austin Watkins, who is currently hurt, has a chance to come out and beat one of those guys for a roster spot. A tight end, I only have three guys: George Kittle, Ross Dwelley, Charlie Warner. Charlie Warner's actually come around quite a bit in training camp and in preseason. He's made a few catches, and most of the time he's going to be that kind of blocking tight end. Offensive line, starters: Trent Williams, Lincoln Tomlinson, Alex Mack, Daniel Brunskill will probably start at right guard, and then Mike McGlinchey at right tackle. And then the three reserves: Aaron Banks, who has struggled in camp and is injured right now. I don't think he's going to be on IR, though. I think he's going to be back soon enough. Jalen Moore, who I think he's definitely flashed more than Aaron Banks, but he's going to be that swing tackle with Sean Coleman having another injury. And Colton McKivitz is a guy that they can, he has versatility. He can either kick inside and play guard, or he can go outside and play tackle. So you kind of get three different molds there. I like the way that's set up. Moving to the defensive line. Now, on the defensive line, I think you could go a few ways. I also think, it's the edge guys are going to be Nick Bosa, D Ford. You could consider Samson Ebukam that. I think that you're going to see him at linebacker too, but for this case, I'll move him into D line. So overall, my whole defensive line room is going to be Nick Bosa, D Ford, Samson Ebukam, Javon Kinlaw, Eric Armstead, DJ Jones, Kevin Givens, Zach Kerr, and then who else did I have? And then I had Arden Key, of course. Arden Key's flashed a lot. This does leave Mo Hurst and Jordan Willis off the roster. However, Mo Hurst is probably going to go on IR, and Jordan Willis is suspended, so they don't have to be on this 53-man roster initially. That will leave Contavious Street cut, and he's like the only guy I think that you're going to see cut. You're still keeping 9 defensive linemen, and you have 2 guys coming back. It's going to be a very crowded room. Now, this is a really good problem to have for the 49ers. We saw in 2019 how big of a deal having that second group of defensive linemen in. Well, I mean, you just heard all the guys I named. If you have Nick Bosa and then D Ford's kind of coming in to spell him every once in a while, I don't know if he'd spell him, but more of like that speed rushing type. You have Eric Armstead who can play both spots. You have Arden Key, who like I said, flashed a ton. Arden Key, I really liked him in preseason. I think that he has a chance to maybe play almost like a Kerry Hyder role with Nick Bosa starting. I think that's what you could kind of expect. I also think that he's a guy that could actually make some money being on the 49ers team, be a guy that just comes out there and they're like, wow, look at Arden Key. We only played 20 snaps a game, but at 20 snaps a game, he's getting quality rep after quality look. So if he can keep being good and playing how he has in preseason, I think that he's a very talented player, very powerful, very long, exactly what you want in a defensive end. And then along the interior, Javon Kinlaw flashed last week. We've seen that Eric Armstead is a great pass rusher from inside. DJ Jones, Kevin Givens, and then Zach Kerr. Zach Kerr I didn't really know of him that much heading into training camp and into the preseason. He's looked spectacular. I really like what I've seen out of Zach Kerr. So I think that he, Givens, Jones, like those are, and Kinlaw, that's great inside options. And then Armstead is going to kick inside and play there as well. Potentially Mo Hurst comes back and competes with DJ Jones or Kevin Givens for one of those roster spots. And then Jordan Willis potentially comes in, and if there's injury, he might compete with the guy as well. Maybe that's Arden Key. Maybe even that's D Ford, depending on how he looks. So they have, what is that? Is that 8 guys or not? 8 guys? 8 guys making the roster with 2 guys potentially coming back. So this is serious depth along the defensive line, and this is exactly where you want to have it. So they got a great spot in the defensive trenches there. At linebacker, I'm going to have Fred Warner, Dre Greenlaw, Marcel Harris, Jonas Griffith, who I've liked a lot in preseason. I also like Marcel Harris at the will spot a lot. Azeez Al-Shaair will probably be that Sam backer, though I do think that he could potentially lose that role to a couple other guys. And for this case, since we have a couple guys out, Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles will make the roster, but I initially had him off the roster before injuries. But I do think he's kind of the last roster spot here, and at a position in linebacker where it's pretty thin. This one is going to be, I think linebacker is a little bit concerning because you have Fred Warner and Drake Greenlaw as the clear 2 starters. Azeez Al-Shaair is also a starter, but they don't use the Sam backer as much, only like 35% of the time that he's going to be on the field. But Jonas Griffith and Marcel Harris have looked really good in their reserve Mike and Will roles. So we'll kind of see how that plays out as the year goes on, but you really want to see Warner and Greenlaw stay healthy because we just haven't seen Jonas Griffith and Marcel Harris in there at an extended period of time at linebacker. We did see Marcel Harris in at box safety, and he made a couple plays, but overall it was a little bit concerning. He wasn't that great in coverage. That's why I think the will linebacker spot is a lot better. But we'll see how that plays out. If he can continue to thump guys and make great tackles before the line or before the first down marker, Marcel Harris can be a converted will linebacker, which is something that we've seen a lot of these guys like Dre Greenlaw converted safety to linebacker. And actually in the secondary room, we do have a couple guys that are similar to that. But before we get into the safeties, I want to talk about corners. At corners, I'm keeping 6. I think pretty much everyone has the Niners keeping these 6. Jason Verrett, Emmanuel Mosley, and K'Wan Williams are the guys that seem like they're going to start the year. Then Diamador Lenore, he's the first guy off the bench. I do think that he could start very early on. Ambry Thomas is going to be more like a depth reserve role this year. He's struggled a little bit. And then Dante Johnson is that last guy. So Dante Johnson, I don't really think you want him making the roster, unfortunately. Maybe to the Niners trade defensive lineman and they get another corner, a 5th corner, because I do think that Ambry Thomas is kind of like that 6th corner. Really unlikely we see him play this year. But I do think that Dante Johnson makes the initial roster if there's no trades or moves. And we'll see how that is. And also the other thing is, I brought up that Dante Johnson could be a guy that gets cut, and same thing with DFF. Those guys, it's going to depend on who else gets cut. So if there's someone that they really want in the cornerback room that gets cut, then they're going to cut Dante Johnson and make that according move. So that's where I'm kind of expecting, some of these bubble guys that I'm not sure if they're quite there to make the roster, are quite good enough right now to make the roster. So a couple of them it's really just depending on who gets cut from other teams. Final position group outside of the special teams guys, safety. I want to keep Jimmy Ward, Jaquiski Tart, Talanoa Hufanga, Tavon Wilson, and HaHa Clinton Dix. So 5 guys. Now, with those 5 guys, one of them is not really a safety. So you have Jimmy Ward at free. You have Jaquiski Tart at box. Maybe Tavon Wilson beats him out. I thought Tavon Wilson had a great camp, great preseason game, so I could potentially see him beating out Tart, which is a little bit weird because I would have never expected that heading into this year. I think HaHa is right now. I think he's got to be the backup free. That's my guess. That's kind of where I have it slated. And then Hufanga is linebacker, box safety, special teams guy. He's really just like a defensive chess piece. And this is going to sound kind of weird, but it's almost like Jamal Adams in a sense, where I know he gets the slander as it's being called Blitz Boy, but this is a guy that is just going to be all over the field, just wrecking the game. You're going to see him mostly on running downs, on base downs, opposed to third down, unless he's coming in as an off the line blitzer. You're going to see him at linebacker. You're going to see him at Sam. You're going to see him all over the field. So I don't consider him a true safety when I put him on this roster. That's why there's 5 safeties being held. And then also this is part of the reason is that you have a defensive line group where there's a couple guys missing. So a lot of this might not be exactly perfect, but this is where I have this team right now. Really, really, really deep team. I mean, you're talking about roster spots that like back end roster spots that have quality players. Kevin Givens is, slated in your final defensive line spot. That's really, really nice. HaHa Clinton Dix, Tavon Wilson. These are longtime veterans that are now backups on this team. The only spot where you don't have a ton of depth, you could say offensive line. Now, I do think Colton McKivitz and Aaron Banks are, those are the big question marks there as reserve pieces. And then Brunskill starting. I think those are the main question marks. Jalen Moore has looked really solid, and he could potentially be a good swing tackle. But outside of that, I mean, corner, I think, is the other spot where it's just you don't know exactly what you're going to get. Dante Johnson, Ambry Thomas, I wouldn't want to see them on the field. I think that they might get picked apart. I also still believe in Ambry Thomas, but, he struggled early on. The emergence of Diamador Lenore is massive because he is now that first guy off the bench, or E-Man eventually becomes that first guy off the bench, and you actually have a solid depth piece that you can go to. So we saw the 49ers get burned in that Dolphins game last year because they didn't have that guy. So that could be huge, but overall the depth on this team is really, really good. You can talk about the Browns, you can talk about the Bucks, you can talk about a couple teams, but you have to bring up the 49ers if you're talking about the teams with the most depth in the league. And I'm excited. I think this is a really, really good roster. This is one of the best rosters the Niners have had under Kyle. You can make the argument that it's a better roster than 2019. Defensively, you're losing Buckner. That's going to be the big loss. But outside of Buck, I mean, this is a much better offensive line. This is a much better offense. You have a Brandon Ayuk opposed to 2019 where it was Sanders and Debo. Now you have Ayuk. You have Kittle. I mean, you have Debo. You have Trent Sherfield, who's looked really good. The offensive line looks a lot better. You have Alex Mack. You have Trent Williams now. And I know they had him last year, but they didn't have him in 2019. So this team is a lot better. You also have 2 quarterbacks. If the quarterback goes down, it's not the end of the season, which is super rare, and that's been the case. So I'm really excited about this team. In the comments, let me know what you guys think. If you have any other different guys making the roster, please let me know. And remember, the only reason Willis and Mohurst didn't make the roster is because they're currently injured. And yeah, I think the only controversial one I think that you guys will think is Gallman over Hastie. And I get that, but that's just where I'm at right now. So that's going to do it for today's episode. Thank you guys for listening. I was happy to rock this one solo. And me and Aiden will definitely respond to this and, talk about some of the last preseason game and things like that. Definitely will bring up the 2 quarterback system. So sorry we couldn't get a video out yesterday, but wanted to get the 53-man roster projections before the actual roster came out. So thank you all for listening, and we will talk to you guys very soon.